to the 7th episode of Wilberforce Alums. And before we get started, this episode is going to be featuring a conversation about getting out the vote. You know, we're about 40 days from voting, November the 3rd, and we think it's necessary as the Alumni Association to talk about what's necessary for everyone to get out and do their obligation, their right to cast their vote. Now, before we get any further, please hit subscribe or give us a thumbs up if you like what you hear. And that way we will lock you into being a subscriber of the Wilberforce Alums. Now, today we're going to start off with our guest, Miss Joyce Bailey-Wilson. She's the legal end of the Memphis chapter of Wilberforce Alums, who I depend on quite a bit to help me to stay legal as it relates to different things that we have to deal with as a alumni association. She is also a 1973 graduate of Wilberforce University. Wilberforce University, the first private historically black college in the nation, founded in 1856, located in Wilberforce, Ohio, right off of Highway 42. So at this point, let me introduce to you Mrs. Joyce Bailey-Wilson. Come on board, Joyce.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
I'm fine. Doing real good. Doing real good. Yes, indeed. Look, as we get started with this episode number 7, which we're going to dedicate to voting, the need to vote. As we go into it, why don't we just let you kind of introduce yourself about who you are and your background and kind of lead us into this voting issue that we're dealing with in this particular year, 2020. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jim. I am a 1973 graduate of Wilberforce University. My maiden name was Titus, Joyce Titus. That's how people will know me. I left Wilberforce and went to Georgetown University Law School. And after that, I worked various jobs for the federal government. I eventually ended up working for USA Today, Gannett Corporation. And that's what I retired from. Then I went into private practice. I specialized in employment and labor laws. So I negotiated labor contracts around the country. Today, we're going to talk about voting and voting rights. And I thought I would start off by giving some history about being a nerd, of course, tell you some history about voting. Historically, the Constitution didn't say anything about voting. It didn't contain anything about the right to vote. And so, but over the course of the years, we've had various amendments to the Constitution that brought voting to the forefront. For example, the 12th Amendment established the Electoral College, and that's how we elect our president and vice president. And that was in 1804. The 15th Amendment permitted men over the age of 21 the right to vote, regardless of their race, color, or previous condition of servitude or slavery. And that was in 1870. And of course, that directly impacts us as African Americans and as, you know, members of, as people that graduate from HBCU schools. The 17th Amendment changed the way senators were elected. And that's important because before the 17th Amendment, senators were elected by the state legislatures and not by the people. And so if you didn't vote for your state legislature, then you didn't have any input and became your senator to go to the United States Senate. The 19th Amendment permitted women to vote, which is very important to me, and that was in 1920. In 1964, the 24th Amendment outlawed poll taxes, and poll taxes required poor people or people of color, black and brown people, to pay money before they were able to vote. And this is particularly important to me because my grandmother paid a poll tax in Mississippi. And so I remember her having this conversation with my parents about paying a poll tax. And finally, the 26th Amendment, which you can probably relate to, Jim, it changed the law so that you could vote at the age of 18 instead of 21. because so many people were going to the Vietnam War and were not able to vote. And that becomes very important. If you can go to war, you should certainly have the right to vote. And so that's like a quick synopsis of where we are historically with the right to vote. So for all of us, alumni as well as current students, we should hold very near and dear the right to vote as African Americans.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm well aware of the fact of being able to vote at 18, having spent little time in the military during the 60s before heading to Wilberforce University. But, today's environment, we hear a lot of folk talking about, especially young folk, asking the question, well, are you registered to vote and have you voted before, et cetera? And some of the comeback I've heard is, well, no, I haven't registered, or yes, I have, but I haven't voted yet. And so the question is, we don't think, or I've heard this said, that why should I vote when my vote doesn't count? So why don't you address that particular issue that I know you've heard the same thing?
I think that's a very good question. And I think the way that should be answered is, if you enjoy the way you live your life now, then I can't say anything to encourage you to vote. But if you see the need for change in the way that your life is, you need to vote. All facets of your daily life are impacted by voting. And particularly African Americans, we depend on our representatives to deal with all kinds of issues like taxes, clean water, student loans, the interest you pay on student loans, healthcare, minimum wage. All these things impact your daily life. And if you don't participate in that process, then you don't have any right to complain. So I say to anyone who hasn't voted, get into the game. This is not a spectator sport at all. You need to get into the game and be a part of the solution. Just today, we heard information regarding the Breonna Taylor case. Now, I went online and looked it up. The Attorney General for Kentucky is an elected office. If you want to effectuate change in your life, then you need to vote. If you're happy with the decision you heard today, then it was wonderful that he was elected. If you weren't happy, then if you want to effectuate change, certainly voting in Kentucky or anywhere around in the country, it makes you have a voice in who your leaders are. And that's important to everyone.
Yeah, all I can say to that is amen. I think, the very, critical aspect of voting is, we complain a lot of times about things that we have to do relative to things that go on politically and who represents us. And some of the times we talk about who we think don't represent us fairly. We definitely have a control in that if we get out to vote. In other words, if we don't like what's going on in our country, then what we need to do is share our concern with others and get other folk to turn out to vote. Voting is important from that standpoint, and it's critical if you're not happy with, what's going on relative to the political aspect of your city, your county, and your nation. That is really important to make certain that you have people that vote your concerns. So, right. So, right now, I don't know. I just keep hearing about, voting and the need to vote and get out to vote. We need to talk about in terms of a plan for voting. In other words, we think voting may be so easy, but I think we've seen so many cases of the vote being suppressed, especially in the Black community. And so it's only suppressed if we let the vote be suppressed. So we can work around that if we develop a plan and a strategy to work around that. Our need to political process. Everything that transpires today is political, whether we want to believe it or not. In church, in school, everything has some sort of political connotation. And so we just have to get ready for that and accept that and participate in that if we think there needs to be some change. So now the issue is, what's our plan? How are we going to go about making certain that our vote is counted? You got any thoughts on that, Joyce?
Yes, I have. I think that the first thing you need to do is know the rules of the road. You know, you need to exercise your right to register to vote. And once you go in to register to vote, find out exactly what you need to effectuate your vote. By that I mean, you now register to vote, but when you actually go to vote, what do you have to present? What kind of documents do you have to present to show that you are entitled to vote? That becomes important. You cannot go to a polling station and not have proper documentation. You can't say, let me go back home and get my stuff. The voting period may be over by then. And so I think it's important to, when you go to register to vote, find out from the Secretary of State, whoever you register with, what documents you need to establish your right to vote. And I say that because the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was gutted, recently with the case of Shelby County versus Holder, and that's where they allowed states to now enact laws to restrict your right to vote. You got to show certain ID in order to vote, but you have to know these things. That's why I say do your homework first. Find out what you need to do. You can go to vote.org or any number of organizations online to find out how to register to vote, even online. And that's important. That's the first thing you need to know. You need to know, like anything else in life, you need to know the rules of the road. That's what I say.
Well, that's right. If you're going to play the game, you got to know the rules of the game. And I think this early voting thing is about to end in some states. I know in a lot of states it ends October the 5th. So one of the first things you need to do,
I'm sorry, that's registration.
Well, that's what I mean, registration, yeah. But, relative to that, though, I mean, you need to know whether or not you are actually registered in the location where you live. In other words, a lot of times some states purge their voter registration rolls. And so
yes,
make certain that you're on the rolls to register so that when you do go to vote, you don't run into any issues about not being registered.
And I think on vote.org, you can find that out. Go on there and register, and you'll find out if you're registered. And if not, they'll tell you what to do to get your registration in order. But I think the most important thing is to do it now. Time is not on your side. It's September 23rd? Yes, September 23rd. And as you said before, October 5th for Tennesseans is the last day here to register to vote. So it's important that you do that. The other thing I think we need to realize is that people in college may be living in, for example, Wilberforce may be living in Ohio, but are residents of, let's say, Tennessee. The question is, where do you vote? Where do you register to vote? That you need to figure out from your Secretary of State. Go online and figure that out. Right now, I think most of the students at Wilberforce are home. So you should be able to register to vote in your home state. And that's important. The other thing is that, remember, you can't register to vote in two states. You cannot register to vote in Ohio and register to vote in your home state. You have to register in one state only. That's called voter fraud. You don't want to get engaged in that.
That's right. You may want to state that again, because I think that's important for college students to know that, where they're going to register to vote and how they need to go about it. So state that again so that make sure that that goes home for them.
The point I'm making is that if you are a resident of your home state and you are home now, you should be registered to vote in that state. Even though you've gone to school in Ohio, you're going to be in that state. You should register to vote in that state. That's my recommendation to you. Where you're situated now is where you should vote, because you're not going to be going back to Wilberforce anytime soon. So I implore you to register to vote in your home state, where you are located, where you are a resident. The problem is that you cannot be registered to vote in two states.
Right.
And that becomes voter fraud. So I'm saying the main thing to do, the prudent thing to do, is make sure you register to vote in your home state where you are residing now.
What do you think about voting early? What's your thoughts on voting early relative to what we're hearing today about long lines and et cetera?
You know what? I'm really going to vote early, but I'm going to do in-person early voting. I am just so reluctant to engage in all the shenanigans with the post office and absentee ballots that way. I don't think that's prudent at all. I think a lot of things can go wrong with that situation. You're going to find a lot of votes will be missing. You're going to find, this is just my speculation. I think that all kinds of misdeeds will occur during this election. And while I'm not going to take sides in this matter, I think that that it would be wise for anyone to, if you decide to go the absentee ballot route, to track your vote. And I think you can do that. You can contact your Secretary of State, and I think they have a method by which you can track your vote online.
Right.
You vote absentee ballot. But I'm telling you, this is too fraught with the opportunity for mischievous activity to go that route. So I'm definitely going to go early. Tennessee offers us early voting, I think, from October 11th to October 29th. And I'm going to take advantage of that opportunity. And also, I will be social distancing, and I will wear a mask.
Well, you better bring your chair and your lunch with you.
Oh, absolutely.
But you know what? In regards to there's another consideration with voting in person too, and is for people to consider, and that is, accessibility of the voting polls. In other words, if you have some sort of handicap, or wheelchair bound, etc., you may need to check to see just what the capabilities are of your polling place relative to where you go to vote. And if there is an issue with that, you may need to contact your election commission or whoever garners the elections in your particular city or county, whatever the case may be, as to the accessibility requirements for you if you have some issue with getting in and out of a voting location.
That was,
go ahead.
That was going to recommend, particularly for first-time voters. You're home now from school. You're doing school remotely. I would go check out my polling place. I would just go, get the address of where your polling place will be. Go check it out beforehand. Get the lay of the land so you know exactly where you're going. And if there's any difficulty there, you can with accessibility, certainly you'll know that in advance.
Good idea. Yeah, that's a good point, George. Let me see if we got any other things that we want to cover here with our audience in regards to voting. I know. Let me just first of all state for those who are just tuning in that we're visiting about the issue of voting with Mrs. Joyce Bailey-Wilson, a graduate of Wilberforce University in 1973, and also a law student, graduate of Georgetown University, who has done a lot of work for the Memphis chapter, where I'm absolutely located from time to time. So what else can we share before we conclude this topic?
Well, I have a couple of things. One is that there are 20 million eligible college voters. That's a lot of voters. And that means they can have a great impact upon this election. So I encourage every college student out there, exercise your right to vote. There are also 30 million African-American voters out there eligible to vote. That's important. We have been eclipsed by the Hispanic vote because there are 32 million Hispanic voters eligible to vote. But I encourage all people to vote. This is your right granted by the Constitution. And I think it's important that we exercise it. The other thing is that I'm surprised that the Generation Z, that's the college students now, they will be at a higher percentage rate of vote. If they vote, they will comprise a higher percentage rate of voting than the millennials since the 2016 election. And that's really astonishing. So they will have great power if they vote. So I encourage all the college students to please vote.
Good point. So let me conclude by just kind of reciting some of the things we talked about as maybe 5 key items to tune in on as we prepare to vote. I would say number 1 would be confirm your voter registration status. Make certain that you are registered to vote. Number 2 would be know your polling place location and the hours at that polling place. Number 3, know your state's voter identification ID requirements, and make sure way in advance that you have what is necessary to reduce any issue when you go to that polling place. Number 4, check the accessibility of the polling location to make certain that you have no issues in gaining access to the voting location. And the last one I would consider is consider voting early, and be prepared. Even if you vote early, I'm hearing that there's even been some lines for early voting. So, preparation is what is going to be necessary for this round of this particular election process this year, November the 3rd. So that's all I've got for this episode 7, which I think is a pretty key episode, because this voting process for this year is going to be really, really, really critical. We all need to take advantage of our right to vote and have our ballot cast and counted as we look towards the future. Joyce, thank you for joining the Wilberforce Alums Podcast, episode 7. We certainly appreciate all you do to keep hope alive at Wilberforce University.
Thank you, Jim.
And the Alumni Association. So having said that, I'm signing off for the Wilberforce Alums Podcast, episode 7.